Rightio, now these cracks, I'm going to use a multi-tool. Now they're not a bad thing, they're pretty good to use for a lot of different jobs, and I'd probably highly recommend one of these if you're doing a little bit of work on your car. They just come in handy for so many different things. Alternatively, to cut into the cracks to make grooves, you can use either a file or a small hacksaw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a V groove into every crack on the wheel here, and that's just to allow the putty to get right down to the steel frame, because no doubt the age of this thing, it's shrunk and cracked and it's stopped at the steel frame. And also, trick of the trade, once we've cut the V groove in, on each side of the V groove, if we're looking at it like that, we'll cut with a drill bit or with the multi-tool. I've got a sharp sort of end on it which is somewhat like a drill. I'm going to cut little holes into the V groove all around the crack on both sides, and that's just going to provide a bit of space for the putty to form a rivet that can fit into the hole. So once it's hard, it virtually acts as a rivet, and it's still part of the putty itself, the body of it. So that is just going to add more strength to holding the two sides of the crack together. Right, now the grooves are cut and it looks like I've butchered the whole wheel. Next thing I'm going to do is start to put in those rivet holes. Right, that's all done. Now that I've got the grooves and the rivet holes in there, I'm going to get some wax and grease remover, clean all the grooves out, and then I'm going to mix up some putty to fill the gaps. I'm going to need a very specific type of putty here to fix the cracks in this wheel. Now I'm using KBS NuMetal. Reason for this is it's a two-part putty. You can work it by hand, and it's also water-based. Now what I'm going to have to do is mix equal parts, 1 to 1, of the putty together. One's actually a little bit firm and the other one is actually very soft. So I'll knead those together very, very well, and that's probably the critical part with any job. The preparation is the most important. So you get high bonding strength and the mixture is right. Depending on the temperature of the day, you'll have a shorter working life or a working time with the putty if it's a lot warmer. On a cooler day, it'll have a longer working life. Good thing about this is it's two different colours, so you'll know how your mix is going. But fold it over itself, roll it out. It's fairly warm today, so I'm working fairly quickly to get the mix right, and it is a must to wear gloves when using products like this. You don't want to obviously have chemicals absorbed in your skin. If you can see how it's done, it's always better than reading instructions, because sometimes instructions can be confusing. Okay, bring the wheel on. We're going to go for the first crack at the front. What I'm going to do is take a segment off, and I'm going to roughly roll it out to a shape that will fit around the wheel. It is fairly soft to work with, so it's going to mould in very well. Now, being so soft, it's going to squeeze very well into the holes and right into the grooves that I've got there. And that's probably the critical part. As you can see, I'm pulling it through, a little bit like patching up your walls when you're painting at home. I'm pulling it through on both sides, getting enough pressure on the putty to really squeeze down into the gap. And I always say it's always best to have a little bit more than a little bit less, because if you have a little bit more on, you can always remove the excess. If you have a little bit less, then you're stuck mixing some more up, and you'll have to wait for this to dry. This will dry very quickly today, roughly within an hour. Its maximum bond strength will be achieved after about 12 hours. Doesn't have to look pretty, long as you've done the structural part of the job and squeezed it into the crack that we've repaired and applied enough pressure so it's actually squeezed into those little holes that I've drilled into each side of the groove. You can see those little rivet holes that I've drilled in the sides. I've just got a bit more putty for this one, and I'm going to do the same again. Press it in and drag it across one side, press a little more in and push it across the other side so the putty squeezes right into those rivet holes. And you can see this section of the steering wheel here, fairly thin, a little upstand. I'm going to form a little bit of putty for that area too. First I'm going to squeeze in the putty. And then I'll form a small upstand out of the putty itself too. And when this hardens, just the same, I can use my multi-tool with a grinding piece and I can reshape this section of the steering wheel right through here. We're not looking for a great finish, as I said. The main thing is that you've got the structural side of it down. Rightio, that's all done. I'm going to let that dry and harden before I start sanding it down. Okay, now let me just explain the method behind all this madness with the preparation of the wheel and applying the putty. I'll get this diagram here. Put this fella aside. Now, if we look at the diagram, you can see, well, this here for starters is the steering wheel on the sides, and this is an expanded side view, and there's our V groove on these sides here. Now that goes right around the wheel itself, and you can see these rivet holes. Now these rivet holes go right around the diameter of each side of the V that we've cut into it. The resin, now the reason for the V, the resin is able to come right down to the steel frame, and this here is the steel frame that's part of the steering wheel itself. So the resin has been able to come right down. Also it gets squeezed into these rivet holes that go right around the wheel, and hence the reason why I said to squeeze it one way and then squeeze it the other way as you're pushing it into the groove when you're going around the wheel. And that's it.